Our final speaker is Dr. Alex WinterNelson, who is the director of the Office of International Programs in the College of ACES. And he's also professor in the Department of Ag and Consumer Economics. And his research has been motivated by a desire to understand the relationship between development interventions and poverty or food security in developing countries. So, Alex, let me get you booted up here.
Thank you very much. I'm Alex WinterNelson. I have a few titles. One of them is Director of the International Food Security Initiative, which is a new program of the College of Agricultural, Consumer, and Environmental Sciences. And from that one, I want to commend iSEE for the brilliant choice of topic for this first Congress. And thank you for letting me participate today. And thank all of you for still being here at this late hour, and assure you I will talk fast if I can't be brief. I'm an economist, and so I'm interested, well, I am as an economist very interested in the measurement of effectiveness. And in particular, the effectiveness of technology changes or institutional innovations that are aimed at achieving better food security. So what I'm going to do now is assume you'll all accept that it would be good to be able to measure or understand which technologies or which institutional innovations are having more or less impact on food security. And assuming that you'll accept the importance of that, I want to talk about some problems that make it difficult to actually measure that effectiveness, and then discuss a model that involves a partnership between a corporate sponsor, a land co, an NGO, Heifer International, and the University of Illinois to address some of those problems. And that's what I'll do, if I can figure out what button to push. All right, so the first question is aren't these impacts obvious, right? We want a technology that'll feed 9 billion, so let's get a technology that produces more biomass. So here you've got a flood-tolerant rice on one side, a conventional rice on the other side. Clearly the flood-tolerant rice is doing better. It's got more biomass. It's going to have more grain. So we've seen the effectiveness. Aren't we done? If we were, you wouldn't have 3 economists in this panel. No, you're not done, because if we're talking about food security and feeding 9 billion, then the outcome of interest isn't just producing more food, it's having more access to food. And it's completely appropriate that we focused on efforts to increase food production, because we need to increase food production to increase access. But that's not the end of the story. The production fits into a complicated food system, and we're interested in knowing whether at the end of that food system, a technology has delivered more access to food to people who didn't have the access to start with. If you think about it in that way, there may be lots of different technologies that increase production sustainably, but some of them might have more food security impact than others, and the interest is identifying those with more food security impact. So the first evaluation problem is this problem that higher yields might not mean more access to food, and so the outcome of interest isn't just productivity or yield, or even sustainable productivity or yield, however we define sustainability, but sustainable access to food. And the outcome then is, for example, reducing stunting among children like those, or improving the quality of their diets, increasing the dietary diversity that they're consuming each day as a way of measuring the impact. Another problem with evaluation, and a second one, is that it can be hard to tell what a technology has done and what a farmer has done. Better farmers, like that guy on the right, adopt better technologies. Okay. So at the end of the day, they get a higher yield. It might be difficult to know how much of that high yield is because he's a good farmer, and how much of that high yield is because he bought the better seed or he used the fertilizer. Distinguishing those two, well, is ticklish. It raises the problem of endogeneity if you're an economist. It raises an attribution problem. All right, my favorite slide, I've used it before. We have these two farmers, they look about the same. They're similar on observables. All right, I can't really tell looking at them which one's a better farmer, what their outcome's going to be. I would say those two farmers are the same. Except I observe that one of them chooses to participate in a new technology or a new institution. One of them gets the smart subsidy, the voucher in Malawi. One of them gets the new storage bag. One of them uses the new hybrid variety. The other chooses not to. All right? Now, the fact that they made those choices differently means that they're different on some unobservable brains, innovation, risk-taking, whatever. On something that we can't see, they must be different. If they weren't different, they would have both chosen the technology, right? So I know that they're different. They're different on something I can't measure, but they're different. And maybe it is, like I said, a risk preference, maybe it's a preference, maybe it's an entrepreneurial spirit. At the end of the day, I get a different outcome. It's an outcome I care about. It's what they consume. It's how much milk their kids are drinking, something like that. And I see that the adopter, the participant in this technology, is consuming more than the non-participant, but I don't know if that's because of the technology or if that's because of the unobservable, because of the brain. Right? It's probably because of both. I don't know how much to attribute to each of them. Right? I don't know if it's 90% because she's a risk taker and 10% because of the technology, or the other way around. All right. That's the riddle that I need to unwind, though, if I'm going to figure out what technology is having what impact on food security. All right, and that's a general problem. Another problem that comes out is a spillover problem. That farmer chose to participate. That farmer's producing more milk. The other farmer didn't choose to participate. But at the end of the day, a year later, say, they're both drinking more milk because the participation by the adopter just changed the food environment. Now there's more food in the community. There's more milk in the community. There's more available. So both farmers are consuming more, even the non-adopter. There's a positive spillover. And if I'm going to measure the impact of this technology, I want to capture this impact here. I want to capture that spillover effect. I don't want to suggest that the impact is just the difference between those two. Really, it's the difference between those two and those two, right? There's a lot more impact there that I'm missing if I don't find a way to be sensitive to the spillover effect. And at the same time, there might be a misattribution if I'm not paying attention to the selection problem, that good farmers select good technologies. All right, so there's these challenges for impact evaluation, and the first one is to capture the relevant outcome. That's a access question, a question of what people are actually consuming. And the second problem is to attribute the impact I measure correctly between the technology or institutional innovation, the farmer characteristics, and could be some totally exogenous changes out there that I haven't thought about at all. And the third problem, well, I can only do those first two. I can only address those first two if I'm cooperating, or at least have some compliance from the agencies that are distributing this technology or this innovation, right? So I need their compliance if I'm going to be able to measure these outcomes, and they might prefer testimonials. They might prefer the farmer who says, it changed my life. Or they might prefer a field trial that shows an increase in yield because it gives them a good result. They might like that, but I can't improve my evaluation unless I get their compliance and participation. All right, so getting beyond field trials and testimonials to measuring effectiveness on the outputs that we care about, on the outcomes that we care about for food security, can be done. And is being done through this kind of cooperation among NGOs that implement new technologies and new institutional changes, corporations that sponsor them, and universities that can provide the research expertise. Now, the basic approach is something that Craig mentioned. It's creating randomized controlled trials, somehow transforming the implementation of some innovation, the implementation of say, distribution of better storage bags, into a field experiment, transforming that into a controlled trial of some kind. And to do that, I think you need at least three things. First, you need cooperation from an implementing agency. So our idea is, say, we've got a better storage technology in the form of a better bag, and there's an NGO that's job is to distribute these sacks to villages and change food waste and improve food security. Can I get them to randomize that distribution? To randomly select communities that will get the sacks and communities that won't get the sacks so I can measure the outcomes. They might not want to do that. For one thing, it increases their costs. They have to think carefully about how they're going to implement their program, and they might not want to be bothered by it. And it creates the risk that I will find an outcome they don't like. Right? And they might not want to play along. On the other hand, they probably do care about real outcomes, and they probably do have a mission commitment, and so they might be interested. The second thing we need to do this is sponsorship. And this gets into corporate social responsibility. A lot of times, NGOs that are implementing strategies, implementing technologies to improve food security are funded by corporate gifts as part of the corporate social responsibility. Those corporations might have an interest in knowing what the impacts are, but frankly, they might be committed to it. They might believe in the agency already, and they might well see any money diverted to paying me to do an impact evaluation as money taking away from having direct impact. Why should we pay an economist to measure the impacts when we'd really rather just serve another village? So there's a diversion from direct action, and it only happens if the corporate sponsor actually truly cares about having an impact and actually truly is committed to figuring out where their impacts can be the greatest. And the third thing you need is objective evaluation and research expertise. Randomized controlled trials, field experiments can be done very badly, and you can find plenty of examples in the literature, and maybe you'll find one in the next 5 minutes. So it requires expertise, and it requires objectivity. And that is something that we hope is found in universities. Okay, so the example I'm going to give you is an example of a partnership between Heifer International, the NGO, Elanco Animal Health, a corporate sponsor of that NGO, and the University of Illinois. And it's raising the question, does provision of farm animals to poor people in poor countries enhance food security? All right. Larger question is, well, can we measure impacts of an intervention for food security given this problem of self-selection? The good farmers are the ones that are going to stand up and say, give me a cow, and good farmers are the ones that Heifer's going to pick. Can we actually measure the impact of the technology as opposed to being good farmers and these other attribution problems? And even more broadly, can we measure what livestock do to a community? Now, you can start with the promo pictures and lots of great testimonials. These are all from Heifer's websites that say, obviously, this helps a lot. Look. But there are other websites. And it turns out that livestock are controversial too. It's not just genetically modified organisms. There's other livestock, other sites and voices that'll question whether you shouldn't just be focusing on direct consumption of grains. Change the diets, change the habits. It's one of the big five. So why are you focusing on livestock production when you could be focusing on direct consumption of grains? Another won't put a value on it. Another question would be, look, if you want to have livestock, you have to have some basic level of assets. You have to be capable of taking care of the livestock. So if we're focused on livestock, maybe we're just helping people who don't need help, right? Because people who really need help, if you give them a cow, they're going to kill the cow and eat it. So you're not going to give those guys the cow. The guys who really need the goats, if you give them the goats, they can't take care of them, the goats are going to die. So aren't you just providing help for people who don't need help and not really improving food insecurity? Other questions could come up about labor demands. Are you diverting women's labor into taking care of animals? Are you diverting children's labor from doing their homework to taking care of animals? There's lots of reasons you might imagine that this isn't a good strategy. Now, if you start asking these questions and you go to Zambia, you go to the Copper Belt, you'll probably run into Heifer, and you'll probably get introduced to this lady. Her name is Mama Jele, and she will tell you an inspiring success story. She will tell you that in 1999 she was destitute, and she was. She was a widow. Her adult children both died of AIDS. She had expected they would support her in her old age. She had a bunch of orphans to take care of, and she had no assets whatsoever. Heifer came along and gave her 2 cows, and now, 15 years later, she's the CEO of a major dairy cooperative. She was at that time the president of the National Farmers Union. She's a very powerful and formidable woman, and she will tell you it's because of Heifer. I doubt it. I think it's because of Mama Jele. She's formidable. If she'd been dumped in Illinois, destitute in 1999, I don't know, she'd be provost. She'd be something. So you can ask questions. Would she have moved ahead without Heifer? Would something else, like cash, have put her ahead even further? Would livestock have helped anybody else? Those are questions that you could answer with a controlled trial if you could go back to the year 2000 and not give her the cows and see what happens, but you can't do that. So the idea of a randomized controlled trial or a field experiment in this case is to take advantage of the rollout, to take advantage of the fact that Heifer is moving on to more and more villages, and so to select future recipients and compare them to current recipients. So we randomly distribute this heifer engagements over different villages that heifer is planning to eventually engage with. We build the rollout of the program into the program itself. Okay. And that requires cooperation from the NGO. It requires, It requires cooperation from the NGO to say, we'll let you decide which villages we serve first. It requires cooperation from the sponsor, and it requires an unaffiliated objective evaluator. So this is a picture of a highway in the Copper Belt in Zambia. It's called the Copper Belt because it's got a lot of copper there. The industry collapsed not long ago, so there's a lot of unemployed copper miners who have become farmers. And that means there's a lot of small farmers who want livestock, but there aren't any animals. So receiving an animal is sort of like a medical treatment. It's exogenous. Communities that get heifer get animals, communities that don't get heifer don't get animals. The way it's organized is households join as a group, they apply for support, the group gets approved. So we can figure that if you're a member of this group, you have selected to get animals. You are all similar based on those non-observables. You are all highly motivated, entrepreneurial, good farmers. Heifer has capacity constraints, so only some communities and some groups get the animals at first. And so we're able to identify different groups. Original recipients, farmers who get an animal when we start our survey in 2012. Pass on the gift recipients are people in those same communities who will get the offspring from the animals. They're part of the same farmers group. They've signed up, but they didn't get lucky. And they'll get the second generation instead of the gift. And then we've got the real unlucky folks who are our control, folks in communities that didn't get selected to receive the treatment at all yet. And we hope they'll get treated in the future. So with this, we can compare current adopters from future adopters. And we know we don't have any non-adopters, so everybody is similar on those non-observables. What do we find out? Very briefly, first we found out everybody was poor. This was consumption per capita per day. The adopters, and we had a few non-adopters there in our sample, everybody's poor. So they weren't just cherry-picking people who were better off to start with. They're all living on about $1 a day. Simple measure before, the blue is the control group, the group that didn't get livestock. The red is the group that did get livestock. Before, nobody's making money from animals, as I said, because there aren't many animals in the area. After, surprise, surprise, if somebody gave you an animal, you're making a lot of money from animals. That's not earth-shattering. A little more significant, before, nobody had a very diverse diet. So we have a dietary diversity scale based on 13 different food groups. And you can see on average there, before, people in both groups were eating less than 6 food groups. After, they're eating about 6.5 food groups a day if they received the livestock. After is rounds 2 through 4. We've had 4 rounds of this survey. Okay, I'm an economist, so I have to have some econometrics. Trying to control for all sorts of stuff. This is a difference in difference regression with household fixed effects for those of you who might care. We can measure what is the effect of receiving, say, a dairy cow on dietary diversity. And the direct effect is that if you got a dairy cow, that in the after period, you're eating 0.6 more food groups a day on average. But the other thing that was happening, that was just a direct effect. I get a cow, or in this case, a cow. I'm covering more food groups. My diet has become more diverse. At the same time, I went backspace instead of forward. At the same time, I get an income effect. I've got the cow, I've got more money, so my expenditures increase by about 23%. And that expenditure increase feeds back on more consumed foods, on buying food, and so I get another impact on my dietary diversity. So putting all that together, if I got a dairy cow, my dietary diversity increased on average by 0.9 food groups a day, 1 more food group a day, basically. Expenditure is increasing by 10,000 kwacha, that's $2 a week, just to bring that down to normal terms. Had I gotten a cash gift of that same amount, of the value of the cow plus services attached to it, and invested that and gotten 10%, my dietary diversity would have increased by a whole lot less. My expenditures would have increased by a whole lot less. Without going through each number, I'm happy to give you the reference for the paper. The point is, we could measure an outcome, and we could be confident that that outcome was related to the technology. So the good news here is agricultural interventions can in fact improve food security, a food security outcome. Dietary diversity increases, and we'll be going back to look at anthropometrics in the future. The bad news is food security impacts aren't obvious, and they're not easily measured. And I can't say just because there was more milk, there's better outcome. Measurement of impacts is needed if we're going to guide investments. We do need to think carefully about which innovation to raise production is going to have the bigger impact on actual consumption and food security. So we need that measurement. It's not reflected fully in field station results or even farmers' field results, and it's subject to attribution problems. But we can set up experiments, we can set up pseudo-experimental settings, and we can do some measurement. And of course, that opens another can of worms that I'm happy to debate later with other people, or you. Implications, it's another example of cooperation. It's a very different kind of cooperation from what was discussed earlier, but still the point is cooperation between the NGOs, the corporate sponsors, university researchers is really necessary to make this work, because the contextual information is critical and the basic support and acceptance is critical. It's not necessarily risk-free or costless for all parties. It's necessary, and so I want to right now publicly thank Elanco for agreeing to fund another 4 rounds of this work, and maybe next time food security rolls around 4 years from now, we can talk about it again. All right.
Time for a quick question, and then of course break and move to your question. Any questions for Alex? Yeah.
Alex, the randomized control trials can be expensive to conduct. No, ergo your gratitude to Elanco for 4 more rounds. But are there principles for extrapolating from results from certain randomized control trials for others who, for others who don't have the budget to do one directly? A, it's expensive, and B, there's the real quick question about external validity. I think that's what you're getting at, right? How many randomized controlled trials do I have to do? Do I have to do one in every county, in every village, right? And it's a big literature. And I would suggest there's relevant variables we can look at, right? So I could say that we probably don't have to do another randomized controlled trial in the next district over in Zambia, and I can probably be pretty confident that the milk market is big enough to absorb some scaling up, and the environmental conditions are similar enough that we don't need to do another RCT, right? Where I draw the line, I don't know. And I think the jury's very much out on that. It certainly has to do with how much heterogeneity there is in the area, right? And the more divergent we get from the conditions of the RCT, the more we need another RCT. I would say that I think this approach is most valid for smaller questions. And this is an approach I say it's guiding investments, but really it's guiding investments about which technology we pull off the shelf. I think a lot of this morning's discussion was about creating new programs and technologies to put on the shelf. And there's a feedback, right? We ought to be refilling the shelf where it's getting drawn from. And this kind of approach tells us what to draw down, which should be guiding broad directions. But I don't think it answers every question by a long shot. That's circuitous and rambling answer.
Thanks, Alex. We probably should.
Illinois.